Dr. Moore, thank you so very much for taking the time to visit with me. A dear friend of mine, Dr. Petra Davlar, came across your podcast or your interview with KT talking about melanin as we were prepping for a Parkinson's conversation. So, just a little bit of that backstory on me. My little boy was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer when he was 5. And so I have spent, that was 2019. So I've spent like the last 6 years just trying to understand and piece together and done, hundreds of podcasts with experts as I'm trying to learn, right? So no education. I'm just a country boy from Arkansas that's been trying to piece it together. I have a farmer's market, a lot of agricultural experience. I did work on an ambulance for about 8 years. So I got a little bit of the medicine, right? Training and more on, the emergency medicine. But uh, melanin may be one of the most important molecules ever, and I don't know if there's anybody that understands it or has studied it longer or more in depth than you. So before we get into that, early on in my journey of trying to understand, I asked Dr. Jack Cruz. I said, "What do I do for my son?" And he said, "Well, he has to stay off screens and get a tan on his back." And I said, "What?" Because he was stage 4 Wilm, so it was kidney cancer that had metastasized to lymph nodes and his chest wall. And so that prompted me to try to understand melanin based off of what Jack said, and that led me to you. So, Dr. Moore, thank you so much again for taking the time. If you don't care to give us that little bit of a brief introduction, and we're going to dive into some
Okay.
really important conversation.
Well, thanks for reaching out. First of all, we have to make those crossroads and kind of create an interdisciplinary discussion. So I really commend you for saying that you're not really into the science, but you got into the science because now it's like a critical situation with your family. So a lot of people are scared of science. So for me, I have been interested in science for a long time, but how do we make it practical for people to understand? So, as an African centered psychologist, scientist, there were a lot of discussions about this melanin, which you're now saying that you're coming at having an interest in. But what does it really do and how does it really impact the body? So, there have been many people that have studied this for years. I mean, there's a whole journal on pigment cell research, really out of Japan. You have African centered scholars that have been talking about this for years. So, I'm not the first person to do this, I'm just carrying on the tradition. So I've had longevity in the game to discuss this, but you're a farmer, basically?
Basically.
So you know
Uh,
about pigments.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, pigments are key and critical. I mean, if you see some of your fruit that starts to brown, what is that browning? That browning is the melanin. Why is it coming onto that particular item? Because it's helping out with preventing spoilage. So you see it daily in your, activities dealing with the, growing things. But think about the body, which is alive, which is melanated, and the melanin becomes on the outside of the body really important for, protection from ultraviolet radiation. So the sun is really it's like a double-edged sword, where it's very important for you to generate activity. I think you say you may have read my book, Pigment Power. I have a chapter in there called Sun Conscious. So we need to be conscious that the sun provides all the energy for life. You as a farmer, if no sun, guess what? Your plants aren't going to grow. In that green entity that's growing up, the chlorophyll that's in there, the chlorophyll is the pigment. Without that pigment, that chlorophyll is not going to allow that item to grow. So it's the same thing with the body. So when you say for your son, so it was kidney cancer that was first? That was,
Yes.
yeah, so the kidney itself is a pigmented organ. If you think about it, many of your organs are pigmented. So it's not just the outside of the skin where we're focusing on the melanin, it's also now inside the body. So when you ask the question about Parkinson's disease, yeah, you have places in your brain that are highly melanated. If they do not work, yes, you suffer from neurodegenerative disorders, which is a problem. So the and as I'm trying to lay out how you asked the question about what got you into this. So with the sun and the tanning, and those who are less melanated, they get more sunlight if they're in a environment where sun is kind of an opportunity for everyone to enjoy. But if you're dark in color and there's not a lot of sunlight, it's problematic. What is the main thing that's being generated when you have sunlight? Something called vitamin D. But it's not really a vitamin. Vital amine is really a steroid hormone. And hormones have a powerful impact on our bodies. So if you're dark in color, living in a place that is not as sun enriched, your body's going to go through changes. If you're light in color, white or melanin recessive, living in a place that's really, really sun enriched, you're going to have some problems. So it's a balance that we have to keep our bodies in a homeostatic condition. So you talk about cancer. Have you ever heard of prostate cancer?
Absolutely.
So do you know people that suffer from it or have had?
Absolutely.
Do we know why it happens?
I have my theories, yes, but go ahead.
Well, let me give you a thought. What are your thoughts on that? Prostate cancer, just cancer in general, since you've been studying this for several years now.
Yeah. Cancer is an electromagnetic disease. And this is why melanin comes in so unbelievably important. So the photonic energy that we're talking about is something that is omitted from any sort of real science in medicine. And so for me, I think it's so much more than vitamin D, right? Like vitamin D, the skin is a solar panel for the brain, right? And we have melanin everywhere, as you have laid out. And I think we probably have melanin in a lot more places than even science wants to admit, right? And so anytime that we have this biophotonic chaos, this leads to cancer, right? So that coupling between chromatin and DNA and the mitochondria both producing and emitting light, when that gets chaotic, that leads to cancer, right? And when that happens, what mitigates this? What mitigates the fidelity of that signal? Melanin.
Right. So we have to find a way that's an excellent explanation of how we see how these cells proliferate and regenerate in a bad way. And if you got a blood supply that's going to that cell and now it's now getting more energy, and that's a bad thing. The mitochondria is very critical because the shape of the mitochondria is like a hexagonal shape, and so it's crystallized. So you think about it, what absorbing and taking in energy. So it's the powerhouse of the cell that is mitochondria. It helps to feed the system. So with melanin as a not just an antioxidant, but a energy transformer. So you feel so much better on a sunshiny day. It's because the sun is generating the energy not just here in your skin, but in your brain and your body. Beyond just saying some of these hormones are in our brain, they're also produced in our skin. We don't think about that. But the same chemicals that you find in the brain, in the skin, which means the skin is the largest organ in the body, is alive. So that's our direct connection to the elements that are outside of us. So you see how that could be an easy target for problems that could exist. So the reason why I asked you about prostate cancer because my PSA, prostatic, specific antigen, is higher than it should be. But guess what? It just may be higher in Black people or people of African descent. So you have a rate of death that is higher in Black people all over the planet. That is from Africa, they could be in Asia, they could be in Europe, they could be here in the United States, higher than it is for white people. Well, why is that? It can't just be diet because there's diets in all those different areas. So it has to be because as we go through our changes in our body, hormones change. And so with the prostate being a very important organ for stimulating life, making that semen, make sure that there's growth and reproduction, but over time, those cells change because they're not getting fed or not being utilized in the right way. So we have this case now. They say Dr. Joseph Biden, at his age, is now suffering from prostate cancer. Well, it can hit people as early as 40, 50, 60, and there's some people that really don't get checked out because it is treatable. Your son's kidney cancer was treatable. So there are cancers that are treatable, but it's a matter of what do you do with your body. And you, as a farmer or someone who knows about land and food, there are things like phytoestrogens. They're not our diets. But sometimes, if we take too many of them, it could be throwing off the balance. If you don't get enough, it could be probably altering what's going on in your body. Uh, I've studied phytoestrogens because in my animal studies, I looked at aggression as a topic of discussion. So you would think that most people say testosterone is the hormone associated with aggression. Would you agree to that?
I,
Okay.
I think there's more to it, but yeah, I'm going with you. I'm following along.
So women don't play football, they don't play the hockey, they don't play the rough sports that men do. So people attribute to, well, the testosterone makes people more active? Well, testosterone is the male associated hormone, estrogen the female hormone. Doesn't mean that women don't have testosterone. It don't mean that men don't have estrogen. The point is that testosterone is supposed to be a driving factor. Animal studies, it's what's causing them to be aggressive. Okay, so in hamsters, I've castrated them. You castrate hamsters, you take out the testosterone, they should not be aggressive, correct? Well, in
Shouldn't be.
mice studies, early on, most of those studies show that you're decreasing the levels of aggressive behavior in dominant submissive relationships. Well, these castrated hamsters were still aggressive, and they also got bigger. That makes sense because you ever heard of eunuchs? The eunuchs are those individuals in the past who were the protectors of the harem for the king or prince or whatever. Well, those eunuchs had their testes removed so they wouldn't have any attraction to those females, so they wouldn't want to be involved in, any infidelity, or just what I'm saying. So the testosterone became a factor that they noticed that caused a change in behavior. So these hamsters that were more aggressive, even though they had the testosterone removed, scratched my head. Well, where are they getting this maybe estrogen or testosterone from? The diet. So I did studies where we manipulated the diet. We had a casein based diet versus a soy based diet. Most animal diets are soy based because it's easy to make. So all the laboratory research from studying anything dealing with the cancer to cells, hormones, they just use animals and use diets, and the diets aren't really put in perspective. Well, the animals on the soy based diet did have higher levels of testosterone than a casein based diet. So now the testosterone could be generated from the diet, which is soy, which makes what? Phytoestrogens. So phytoestrogens now become an important discussion, and we show that there's changes in the brain as a result of those diets in those animals. Estrogen receptors are altered. Vasopressin receptors are altered. So if you think about that, just in general population and the foods that we eat and the impact it's going to have on our bodies and the changes, we don't pay attention to that. So over time is when you start to see the problems, not when you're young. I don't know what may have attributed to your son developing what he had. Could it be something in the water, something in the environment? Because the kidneys are the first place to filter. So there's something now become attracted to that area and now cause those cells to abnormally grow. And this issue of metastasis, that's where the problem is with most people who have cancer. So there are studies showing that there are certain adhesion molecules that may be less in African or Black or melanin dominant people. If you don't have those enzymes that can impact the way that the cells can stick, then they're going to float. And that's what metastasis is. And that's why most people may pass from cancers like prostate, because it passes through the body versus staying there localized. It can be treated, take it out, radiate it, deal with it. But if you don't have the molecules or the enzymes that are important for keeping it adhesive, it spreads. So there's variations, not just in the vitamin D complex between people, genetics. It's not only difference in enzymes in people, still genetics. So it comes down to people's genes, and most people who are black African oriented have the melanin not just on the outside of the skin, but throughout their whole body.
So a couple things that come to mind as you're going through that. I wonder, because I don't know offhand, the emission and absorption spectrum of phytoestrogens. I think that would be vital to understanding that entire piece. Everything that I have found in trying to understand and why different botanicals work for whatever element that we have, it seems that specific emission and absorption spectrum play a massive role, because most of them, say berberine, curcumin, quercetin, all of these compounds actually are in the UV range. And I think that is really interesting and something that we need to look at. When we look at Alexander Gurowich's onion root experiment, right? Mitosis is dependent on UV light, right? No UV light, no mitosis. And so also with the metastasis, we have diaphoresis, which is how immune cells that they migrate, right? And so mitosis actually has to be turned off in order for diaphoresis to take light. So I would argue that a lack of UV light is exactly why we are having more metastatic function, right? And so one more thing, that because you've talked about melanated people, When we look at two things, actually, one, say Somalians go to Milwaukee or Toronto and their health is wrecked, right? That is a complete mismatch for everything that you're saying, especially the light. We also know in the literature that at 40 degrees latitude, we see the greater risk for MS. MS really doesn't exist on the equator. So this is another one of those light examples of what we're doing. So I think the disease epidemic that we face is that we're not in the sun enough. The more melanin we have, the darker we have. And we have a cultural connotation that we should be lighter. So I have a friend from Mexico and a friend from China. Both of them have this negative connotation for the darker of their race because it's more attributed to the agrarian lifestyle. They're laborers, right? They're lower socioeconomic part of society. And so then they try to get paler. They hide from the sun because of this, and they don't understand the importance of melanin, which is why I'm trying to have this conversation and learn more, because this to me is the epidemic. This is why we have prostate cancer epidemic. We have cancer epidemic, and that's going to go more into that beautiful PDF that you sent me that I cannot believe you wrote and saw in 2021 about what they were doing and what we're seeing now. The turbo cancers, the chaos is directly related to being injected with a bunch of nonsense, right? So my point is melanin is the solution. Getting people in the sun and building it and understanding POMC and the cleavage products, everything that we're talking about. This is why this conversation may be one of the most important conversations that anybody ever listens to, and why that advice of stay off blue screens and get in the sun, get a tan on your back, was the best advice that I ever got after my baby was diagnosed.
Right. And I value your thought process and your opinions because not a lot of people are able to deal with the issue of just black studies, black information, anything dealing with melanin, because we've been sold this negative vibe on what it is. Just something simple as devil's food cake, or why is it black? Angel's food cake, or why is it white? And so that it just permeates our consciousness to think of everything that's dark as bad. And the reality is, the sun is the progenitor of life. You just mentioned all those chemicals that can be consumed: curcumin, cumin, uh, turmeric. What are they? They're dark colored pigments that assist the body in elevating its life. Um, from bay leaves to fruits called soursop, there's medicinal properties in all things that the earth produces. And then our bodies produce some of those things, but we don't pay attention to it. We don't get enough rest. When you rest, when you sleep, that's when those nerve growth factors are being generated to help your body replenish itself. Uh, I've studied brain derived neurotrophic factor, calcineurin. I've studied that in smaller animals like moths and manduka in terms of how they develop and grow. But just think about us and how you feel much better after good rest. You worked on that farm or you did something with a piece of equipment. Oh, your elbow's sore. Get the good rest. Oh, I feel a little bit better because your nerve growth factors are helping to build yourself over time. So the
And
food,
this is why working on the ambulance about killed me, right? And this is why we see those that have night shift work or work in hospitals or work in schools. We see a correlation in offices, right? Those type jobs, especially if you disrupt that circadian cycle of nighttime and lack of sleep, we see it ties right back in what we were talking about with the sun too. But that environment that we spend ourselves in is either building health or killing us.
killing us. So I wrote that sucker punch pamphlet that I shared with you because isolation was what was suggested to keep people away from one another. And that was the worst thing to do. You stay isolated, you stay inside, you stay away from what the sun, more illnesses. When you speak about the Somalis or any African people coming to the places where they're further away from the equator, yes, their body's going to suffer from that. You can look at this archaeologically and think about those fossils that were stuck, let's say black people stuck in places when they would travel as early Homo sapiens. They traveled and they were then stuck in places where there wasn't a lot of sun, stuck in them, maybe being in the cave, and so in their dark skin changed. But what was some of these, not side effects, but deformities that occurred? Rickets. Those fossils had rickets, which means they weren't getting enough sun to what build the calcium to what make a strong body. So we see the further you move away from the equator, you talked about multiple sclerosis, talked about some other illnesses that can happen when you're away from the equator, not getting enough sun. And then during the winter months, there's some people who do suffer from a disorder called seasonal affective disorder, winter depression. So all those are occurring because this environment is changing. If you don't change with the environment, or you do not take in items to help you to uh, not succumb, but to enhance you, then you're going to be impacted. You think about animals would hibernate. They hibernate, and they hibernate because they want to slow their metabolism down so they can adjust to the environment, because they can't survive if they stay active in a time period that isn't necessary for them to make it. This goes into the melatonin story. So when we talk about this melanin for your audience, there's melanin, melatonin, there's melanocyte stimulating hormone, there's melanin concentrating hormone. All those are different phenomena that all relate to a system that deals with color, blackness, life. So we can't look at it as something bad. The melatonin, though, is a hormone that comes from the pineal gland. So it's not just in the pineal gland, but melatonin is also produced in the eye, potentially probably say in the skin. But melatonin is a hormone. When it's being released, melatonin helps to give tone to your skin. It's released at nighttime, and the sun's not shining at nighttime, correct? So it's retracting the granules so at least some light can get in. Melatonin is not just for the skin, it's also for your behavior. The animals who are, let's say, they can't produce like during the winter months, like deer, uh, they have a reproductive system that shuts down during the winter months, so they're not producing then. How does that happen? Melatonin. It is, it I just
Mm-hmm.
mentioned hibernation. So those animals know exactly what to do. We're the ones that throw it all out of whack.
Yeah. And Russell Ritter put out a study, I want to say him and Scott Zimmerman in 19, where they said that like 95% of melatonin is actually produced from mitochondria, right? Which goes against the entire system of what has been laid out. And not very many people ever even talk about that, right? But something else we talk about that is vital. It comes off of the work of Doug Wallace, right? And haplotypes, right? Coupled and uncoupled, right? The ability to be able to tolerate cold versus not, right? So this is why cold therapy is good for somebody that has an uncoupled versus a coupled would be detrimental, right? This is a big thing. And so Doug's done an amazing job laying that out. Also with heteroplasmy, and he's at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. I think that is such an important factor that I have never talked in. So like, recently, not to make this political about any stretch, but in any time that I have a conversation, because I'm super anti mRNA injections, like this is, we can go into that. That's fine. But the if somebody else said it that I don't like, I'm not allowed to agree with it type thing, right, is just nonsense to me. So Kennedy came out and said something about that black and white people process things differently. Okay, that should not even be a hyperbolic or charge filled statement. If you have laid it out already in that, depending on the amount of melanin, we absolutely do. When you think about coupled versus uncoupled mitochondria, it's the same thing. It is a difference. So, do you have any thoughts on that? Because to me, if we can't even have simple conversations that, well, RFK Jr. said this, so everything else has to be wrong, right? Like I can't follow that.
Yeah, well, I'm not familiar with the Wallace scientists and the cryotherapy work, but that does help the body recover much better after a strenuous activity. So that's why some athletes are doing that now. Didn't know there's a difference probably for some people that maybe not should not be doing that.
Absolutely.
But the differences is what we don't talk about. So right now we have a scenario where everything's politicized, and the fact that you have me on your program, I'm not sure how many black scientists you've actually interviewed and had discussions with, but this is called diversity. This is called equity. This is called inclusion. This is a way that you grow. You can't grow if you're not talking across the other table. Can't grow if you don't understand the science behind someone else's system. So, reality is, right now, we've been thinking and told that we're all the same, but the reality is we're not. When I shared with you that article, it was dealing with blood pressure medicines. Blood pressure medicines do not affect everybody the same. So we can't just throw it out there like we're all going to be able to be uh, utilizing a certain drug or medication, and it's going to impact everybody the same. So yes, Kennedy has a lot of strange things that is stated, but that was a hyperbolic response to say against him that, or you're saying that's a racist comment saying that black people are different. No, it's just talking about the science of what's going on. So I have no problem with that. But the point is that we don't have enough discussions because there have been problems in the past dealing with science. So you've heard of the Tuskegee experiment.
As disgusting. Yeah.
So you know of a writer named Harriet Washington. She wrote a book called Medical Apartheid, right? So people have documented and laid out why there's hesitation and reservation about trusting the science system. I have a black uh, general practitioner. I have a black urologist. So I have someone I can have as confidence, but guess what? They're still in the science. They're still in the system. They're still in the allopathic way of doing things. So I do have to watch, how much I'm being told that, hey, try this, take this, because the first time you go to the doctor, the first thing they ask, well, what's your pharmacy? What drugs do you take? Not what are you eating? Not did you do today? So I'm saying, even though I personally have people who look like me to treat me, a lot of people don't. Therefore, the trust factor becomes into play. If you know historically people have been manipulated and isolated, I'm sure you know about the HeLa cells from a black woman that was not giving consent to her cells being utilized. So here she still is alive today because her cells are being used for science. So there are a lot of things that happen that make people say, no, I don't want to be involved in the science, but the science is the reason, and that's the reason why you and I here are discussing factors and bring us together.
Well, we've realized that we've been lied to about so much, intentionally or because the foundation was a half truth at best. And so, like you bring up the Tuskegee experiment, but it academia, what I have found, because I have had everybody from astrophysicists to oncologists to anthropologists to on and on and on, right? Different fields, crossovers, but whether they have a biochemistry focus, a quantum biology focus, like all kinds of things. And the siloing of information is wild to me. And so all of that being predicated on, essentially it's industrial military complex that's controlled it. It goes back to the Flexner Report, Rockefellers, all that stuff. But something that I want to throw in that everybody should know about, right, is the Cutter incident. Right? When SV40 was in the polio vaccine. So SV40, simian virus 40, is the most oncogenic thing known to man, right? It hamsters, any mammal, like people. So we injected 3 million people with Jonas Salk's vaccine for polio that spread cancer throughout the population. And then when they figured out that this is when Bernice Eddy, so we have this long history of scientists being canceled if they go outside of the line. And so we know this. This isn't even conspiracy, right? You can Google Cutter incident, Cutter Pharmaceuticals. Right outside of New Orleans, right? Alton Oshner was involved with this. DARPA got involved. You have all of the nefariousness goes back there. And so, Dr. Moore, what I'm trying to lay out there is we now know in 2025 that the Pfizer vaccine contained SV40 promoters, the most oncogenic virus known to man. A piece of that is in a injection that people are getting. And so this is why I don't trust the science. I don't trust the safe and effective. I don't trust the allopathic approach because, for one, they either don't know purposely or not, and they are participating in a system that is not working. If you just look at life expectancy has actually decreased. The amount of disease has increased. We are not winning the war on cancer that Nixon declared in 71, right? Which just so happened to be one of Alton Oshner's very good friends, who was Oshner Medical Center in New Orleans, right? So all of these things is just, if you trust what they tell us, anybody, right? And the other thing that they do is they divide, right? If we're all divided based on color, religion, whatever it is, if we're divided, we're easier to control too.
Right. So the silos is very key and critical because the biologists aren't talking to the chemists aren't talking to the psychologists aren't talking. So that becomes problematic. In my area, I'm a biological psychologist, so I could be a behavioral neuroendocrinologist. So I've had appointments in biology and psychology combined. So I try to stay out of the silo to what cross the borders so we can have some conversations about things. So with the AIDS story, again, when you do science, you don't, well, those that are maybe diabolical in their mind, you create patterns. So you now see what can be sequenced to do something else later on. So with the Tuskegee experiment, those were ways to lay the groundwork for what we then know about with the AIDS experiments. Because those studies were manipulated because the army said we need to find a medicine or some injection that can what cancel people's immune systems. Okay, leave the people, keep the building standing, but get rid of the people. So I mean, from the Tuskegee to the AIDS to now what we see with this COVID, all these things are sequenced, but we don't pay attention because we get caught up in like the science experts have all the answers. Well, they're not dealing with food. They're not dealing with the natural products that could be utilized to fight this. I mean, we see it all in the animal world, how they thrive and survive, not going to Walgreens, going to Rite Aid. They know what to do and how to take care of the bodies, but we are now giving our uh, sole interest in our personhood to someone else to treat us. That's why I'm saying it's dangerous when you go to the doctor because the first thing they're going to do is give you this drug. Well, if that doesn't work, we'll try this one. So that is the worst system on the planet. And when you go to other countries that don't have Walgreens, don't have these CVSs, they're in the bush. I mean, I just came back from Colombia, and in Colombia, medical priest, homeopathic doctor, they know how to use the herbs to treat you. You know about ayahuasca. There's certain medicines that can be used to what enhance your consciousness. They can also be used to what squash cancer. So if we don't, so there's no money in that for the pharmaceutical industry. So this medical pharmaceutical industrial complex is why we then don't go to those not normal, those easy ways to deal with it from the environment. Again, you as a person that knows the land, knows the nutrients. If you don't have a good, what do you say, base in your soil, you're not going to get a good product. And you know what? Melanin's important for that also. It can be used as a fertilizer. That's a whole nother discussion. But for you, with you growing and getting your yield to be greatly enhanced, there's some stories we can tell you about that. But we're talking about the science here in the brain.
No, but
So,
no, we can go anywhere. I think that's absolutely fascinating. I want to go back just a little bit. I got excited. We went on that tangent. Like I just despise what has happened to humanity, right? Like, and these last 4 or 5 years has been such an eye opening experience. And so you brought up the AIDS epidemic. I've got a friend, Judy Mikovits, that was at Fort Detrick, right?
yeah, I got her book up here.
Yeah. So I know that backstory, and Judy goes on to say that the SV40 has actually been in all vaccines since '53, and I was like, what are you talking about? And so she said in the Vero E6 germline that they use for all vaccines. So this is just wild to me that we are being forced to take things without informed consent, lied to about it, and then everybody that questions it is a conspiracy theorist wackadoodle. Like, have you just been able to wrap your mind around the conditioning that we all have? Um, eh,
Well, I read enough on that on the outside. I mean, I don't know if you ever heard of a woman named Nancy Banks. She has a
have not.
book called AIDS, Opium, Diamonds, and Empires. So all the things we're talking about, it's about control in the first place. So when I read, kind of digest to put it together, and you see in Pigment Power, I have a chapter in there called the Pigment Power Defense System, where I try to explain how your melanin really is attacked. There are certain fungi that can attack melanin that don't attack other uh, groups. Aspergillus fumigatus. It's a particular fungus that attaches to the cell and is problematic. Well, there are certain elements in our society that can be triggers. And so when we had this 5G rollout, and there's now more than 5G other places in the world. But this pulse of electricity can create a problem for the body. So we know that they can trigger something to make you have a heart attack. Well, then they trigger something with this technology that now is in certain people's bodies. So these triggers are why then we have cancers that are skyrocketing in certain places.
And that's not even conspiracy, right? Frank Church, the Idaho senator, is the one that laid that out with the Church Commission, right? Like they laid all of these things that were happening with MK Ultra. That was in the 70s.
So triggers are key and critical, and not getting the sun is a trigger for your body what to go on a downturn and not be energized. So I mentioned three main factors when I speak of melanin for the novice that doesn't know much about it. One is an antioxidant. Two is a neutralizer of toxic substances. It's an energy transformer, and it helps out to enhance the body, like elevate it. So when you think about all the places that's in the body, it helps to transfer energy. You don't have melanin
Have
on the
you
backside. Yeah, yeah.
do you have that book?
Yeah, he's an ophthalmologist who studies melanin. Not really the brain or the psychology of things, but he talks about how melanin can be used to split water and then again use that for energy. So without a question, I'm saying that the energy transformation, you see it because in your eye. If you don't have melanin on the back of your eyeball, you can have a disease called retinitis pigmentosus. That means you're basically blind. There's nothing there to absorb the light, so you can't see. If you don't have it in the inner ear, you're not hearing certain frequencies. It alters what you hear. So you think about music. There's a reason why there's certain kind of music that black people listen to, certain kind of music that white people or other people listen to, because the frequency is different in terms of what they enjoy. Skin.
Also related to tinnitus, right?
You mean tinnitus in terms of ringing in the ear? Yeah. So the lack of it, or how it's maybe gotten too many chemicals in there, because there are things called ototoxic effects of drugs. When you say ototoxic, that means that the chemical is now being latched onto that melanin in the ear, causing them to have ear problems. In the brain, which you want to talk about with the Parkinson's disease, so the neuromelanin in the brain, in the area called the midbrain, where the substantia nigra exists, if that area is taking in chemicals to neutralize them, so that's not going to disturb the brain, because you have a blood-brain barrier, but if you get some toxic things in there, it's pretty bad because your brain cells don't necessarily regenerate. So the melanin is serving as protection, but if it absorbs too much, clumps up and kills those cells, and that's why then Parkinson's disease may develop. So are the toxic things that exist in our environment? Without a question. Could it be genetics? Oh, definitely. So now you put a combination of things, and there's some people that suffer from the Parkinson's more than others because that melanin is a double-edged sword. It's protecting you to absorb, but it's also now detrimental because it's killing cells.
So have you two things. One, Robert O. Becker, right? Body Electric, book Body Electric. So where Becker goes in, he seemed to have missed the melanin piece with his work. I think his work's absolutely phenomenal. But he missed the melanin is a semiconductor for this entire system that he's laying out. And so in there, I think it's page like 140, he talks about a 1/1,000,000th of an amp takes a red blood cell and dedifferentiates it into a pluripotential stem cell. Okay. That should just stop the world, in my opinion. Like, we can turn a red blood cell into a stem cell. That should be under 1/1,000,000th of an amp. So what happens there is, how do we take something that is as electric as melanin in a dry state and reduce down to this voltage? That's water, right? This is the difference between hydrated melanin versus non-hydrated. Hydrated melanin with deuterium depleted water versus deuterium rich water is a completely different thing. And so that, to me, is like something that we should be just shaking the world down, trying to understand that correlation um, with melanin, water, and the body electric.
Yeah. So the micronutrients or the microenvironment, I mean, that's where we need to be. If you're saying that there are some people that know at the cellular level, going down to the genes and actually also the proteins that are making the cells to transfer. If we don't understand what's happening at that mechanism, that's why we didn't have these diseases just proliferating. So that's where most science is today, looking at the genomic responses of what things are happening outside. There's a whole area of study called epigenetics related to how the environment is impacting, how the genes are then being, I guess, in the long run, being detrimental to your body. So things can be turned on, they can be turned off. And when we talk about apoptosis and the cells dying, there's some things that trigger a certain stage of your life. So I'm, in my sixth decade of life, and therefore my body's going through changes. So as it goes through changes, like, wow, it's like the twinge era. Like, well, what was that? What is this going on? So your body's internally manifesting different things than it was when it was younger. And so that means you can't then do the same things you used to do anymore. That means if you don't then take care of that microenvironment, now that means eat certain things. I always emphasize eating pigmented foods that have color to them. The more dead things you eat, the more dead products that are in your body. But life-giving products will then enhance your life. In terms of water, you mentioned different types of water earlier, but I mean, that's probably critical to why some people's bodies do fail because they're not getting the
100%.
hydration for their cells to be activated. And then you add then lack of sun, you then trigger all these illnesses that are really, as we get later on in life, much more detrimental. But if you take care of yourself when you're younger, it's going to be much easier as you deal with when you get older.
Yeah. I just think that what Watson and Crick in 53 did derailed everything. And so we focused on DNA for 70 years versus looking at the mitochondria. It was like the mitochondria produce water. The mitochondria produce CO2. The mitochondria emit light. It's not just ATP, right? When we look at phosphorus fluoresces under appropriate things. It's a side chain protein folder, right? That's what it does. And so like what Gilbert Ling laid out was like, it is not possible based on the second law of thermodynamics that ATP powers the human body, right? So more has to be going on there. I talked to Thomas Seyfried about this not too long ago, and he said, well, I don't know what else could power the body. And this is the siloing of education, the siloing of science. Like, if you haven't read Robert O. Becker and Roland Van Wyck's work, and yours, right, and Jack Kruse, and you tie together how all of this electromagnetic aspects of the human body are, you miss it all. You miss it all.
So you mentioned the word something dealing with luminescence. Did you say phosphorescence? So like lightning bugs and how at nighttime they light up. Do you know there's nootropic drugs that are using that technology?
I did not.
So when we say nootropic, we're talking about drugs that can enhance your what do you call it? Your
Cognitive ability,
yeah.
supposedly.
So right. So in jellyfish, there's something called apoquorum. It's like a luminescence that is used now in certain products to help people like with Alzheimer's, to help boost their cells to be more energized. Even in science, it's something called optogenetics, where they're using light to shine in to activate
Yes.
certain cells. So without a question, the luminescence and that's what I'm saying with some of the chemicals. I keep pointing that way because the kitchen's that way.
Well, and think about all the processed junk that we eat, and the tyrosine inhibitors, right? That destroys melanogenesis, right? Like, this is such an important copper deficiency, glyphosate. Like, all of this disrupts the ability to even produce melanin, which we know is important. And so, to me, the more naturally melanated that you are, the more sun you need. The older that you are, actually, the more sun you need. You lose the percentage of body, right? We're 80, 90% water. We get into our sixth decade of life, we're probably closer to 60, 50% water, right? And it continues going down. To me, Dr. Moore, I love the science, but at the end of the day, it seems that the solutions are so unbelievably simple that
Right.
it is get in the sun, eat local, natural, and seasonal food, get connected with nature, turn off the lights at night, get rid of the opsin destroying blue lights that liberate vitamin A that throw the whole cascade off. Get back with nature.
Yeah. It takes a conscious awareness though, and we're most of us still stuck in that thing called the matrix. So
Yes.
many people haven't seen the matrix, don't understand it, and don't can't conceptualize that what's really happening. But when you're stuck in the matrix, it's hard to unplug. And so I haven't really watched TV since the Super Bowl. Super Bowl, that's back in what, February? So that was when the Eagles won from Philadelphia. So hey, got the green on. Hey, I'm
Got it.
also
Got it.
dealing with you with life green and fertilizing him. But I've like had no real desire to watch TV. Okay, it takes a step to do that. TV tells you a vision, but it takes a step to do that. So I'm saying for myself, I've unplugged. You think about in the Matrix when Neo came out of the pod and he unplugged and he told Morpheus, "Man, my eyes hurt." What did Morpheus tell him? Because you've never used them before. So most of us are in that position where we're not really awake. We're being fed. Again, most of the drug commercials are there for a reason, and they're on the TV. And that's what I'm saying. I've unplugged from that. Being involved in what's going on in the media, we have a real uh, problem with politics today, and people working together. That's why I admire you for extending your arm and your podcast to me to speak with you. With us coming from divergent environments, but guess what? There's a overlap in consciousness because we're all what trying to have life. You can't live if you're not trying to what produce something that makes you continue on. And so we're trying our best in our different worlds to do the exact same thing. So I'm just saying that for us to unplug, it's hard for most people. They're stuck, and so we have to be patient with them, and you show by example. That's why if you now show what happened to your son and how he's able to recover and get through, wow, you mean I can do that too? That's where it starts. And so now you start, what did you feed him? What did you do? Where did you go? Did the tanning salon really work? Did you just do did you go to more environments that contain more sun? I mean, when you start showing people by example, then they'll follow you. But other than that, people are caught up in the matrix and hearing whatever else is. And since it's the capitalistic enterprise, drugs become the easy way to feed people.
I often say we don't make a change until it hurts bad enough.
Mm, right.
So, unfortunately, that's part of life. We don't wake up for that matrix till something forces us to do so. Because I certainly wasn't.
Right. And then, like I said, the cancer piece is a challenging one because we have cancer cells everywhere. When I said earlier about trigger, what can trigger them to now go in the wrong direction? It certainly would be not just food and diet, could also be your thought process because you can stress yourself out. A lot of those chemicals that deal with stress in the hypothalamus, CRF, goes down to pituitary gland, ACTH, goes to your adrenal glands, kicking cortisol. All those hormones, too much of them being exerted, can have a detrimental effect on your body. So if we don't pay attention to that, which means that we're not paying attention to our thinking, you're now making yourself sick. So it can be beyond just the diets and what we're consuming, is how our thinking is impacting how we're operating. So that's why I'm saying for me, unplugging from the media, not hearing all the negativity that's coming from the political stage. We need to know. I'm cognizant of it because I've already read enough to now put in perspective. But to continually be fed negativity, your body's going to ingest that. And now you got triggers, and now you wonder why you're sick. Heart problems, heart disease. Oh, go to the doctor, give you more drugs. It's a system. You got to break the system, cut it somehow. And again, I think you're doing an excellent job on your podcast with multiple types of people that you've interviewed, and I think you're making an impact.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I just so sick of seeing people suffer, and it does get extremely frustrating when the solutions are that easy. It's not a cabinet full of supplements. It's not expensive technology. It's not all the. It's getting the sun. Understand why you need the sun. And eat local food. Like And nobody in Washington has come to save us,
No.
like any of us, right? Like anybody that puts their faith in somebody other than the person in the mirror has lost their minds, in my opinion. It starts with the self, and then take care of your family, take care of your community, but nobody's come to save us.
So companies like Monsanto consider that the devil because they manipulated the seeds and altered how countries can't produce what they've normally done. Corn is a main staple there in Mexico, but then that's being impacted because of the genetics. They've lived for how many centuries without dealing with these chemical manipulations? So if we don't then understand how that's then negatively impacting us later on in life, we now don't understand how cancers are being triggered because your body has changed. So the melanin piece becomes important because melanin really is a protector. I mean, without melanin, you have some problems in life. The sun is not going away and it's actually getting more intense as the ozone has been depleted, as the environment is being impacted. More sun's coming in. So the sunscreen may not be really good for black people because that means you're not generating the vitamin D that you need. For me personally, my vitamin D levels have been low over the years, and I play tennis. I'm outside. I live in the South, but my vitamin D levels are low. Why would that be? Well, because they're just difference in the physiology. So I take supplements. Guess what? My vitamin D levels, I call it Sotriol. There's some experimenters or researchers in North Carolina, Stump and Prevent. They created the term called Sotriol. So I really call it that versus vitamin D. But my levels have gone up after taking supplements. Most people don't think about that, but it's very important. So the vitamin D is not just for just in your skin. It's for your immune system. It's for your some biological you know processes in your brain, in your organs. So it's a host of things that steroid does, just like estrogen does a lot for your body. People who are older, women, they lack that estrogen. They have some cognitive problems. It leads to something called menopause. So we know it's important. Testosterone, if that changes in a male over the years, guess what? It impacts their libido. It impacts their mood, and maybe some internal changes like the prostate is impacted. So there's no difference with the steroid hormone called vitamin D. As it changes or does not work in the body, it's going to impact you negatively.
I think the environment also factors in on the vitamin D. Like we have people that have tans in LA, right? This is where one of my partners, Dr. Petra, is at, and we're seeing these, tanned and still low vitamin D. But if you look at it, they are living in what's more akin to the space station than they
Mm-hmm.
are on Earth, right? Based on the millions and millions and millions of people, and I think that has a massive effect. I think also that sunglasses are absolute garbage and they're killing people. When you look at visual photoreceptors versus non-visual, and the body mean to be in coherence and harmony, that we throw all of that off. So, and then when we sit in here, like this, like the technology is
Yeah,
amazing, but it's also absolutely destroying our body. Right? That blue light liberates vitamin A that destroys opsins and all our heme proteins, right? And so it's just this cascading of events. But
I think one of your listeners told you to do your podcast outside.
they tell me to do that all the time. But this is the beautiful thing. One thing is I don't know if you can see this, I actually use reptile lights. So it's UVA and infrared lights, incandescents, and my business, my farmer's market is outside. So like I'm basically inside at night, or if I'm on a podcast. So like we're always out. And I think that's great advice, right? But for most people, I have curated my life to be like that. I've designed it. I put intention to being outside. So, man, I hope that we're able to follow up, because there are so many things that I just want to pick your brain on and continuing to dive. And I just feel like the cross pollination and putting in the work is how we make a change in the world.
Yeah. You mentioned California. There are some people that take drugs like melanotan to actually darken their skin. You heard about that?
Yes, and that is a catastrophe.
Yeah. And people are getting high off of that. I mean, it's interesting that even the melanotan, even though it's darken your skin, it can cause erections.
It
That's
well,
interesting.
but that goes straight into the two things, right? Like the tanning beds are a catastrophe, right? That has no infrared. It's typically high UVA, which just stimulates melanocytes and not melanin production. And so then you have dehydrated. You have non-natural melanin creation, which it's not going to be the same, right? Think about Legos that don't match up, that you're just trying to piece together. It's not the same melanin, for one. And then it's dehydrated melanin, which, if you go back to what we talked about on Becker and the 1 trillionth of an amp, you're throwing off the entire electricity. This is how we dampen down it. So that may have a short-term benefit, but they're going to die.
Oh my goodness! It's like putting a turkey in the oven and keeping it in there too long. The skin's gonna come out hard and crisp.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I don't know if there's a psychological benefit from the people who do that, but it's certainly changing the skin tone outside. Physiologically, it's probably not impacting how it should be helping the body out, rather than the natural sunlight that we get, like I said, through our eyes. I don't. Do you wear glasses? Yeah. So I had glasses. I had a prescription 1989. You remember the Mac computers, little small ones? My master's thesis and doing my statistics and my graphics and my word processing, I got up, I couldn't see like 6 feet in front of me. That radiation from that lens destroyed my eyes. So I adapted. I mean, I had a prescription at that point, but I don't wear them because that weakens your eyes. You need a prescription every year if you're going to
What
take class.
it's that blue light that's elongating. It's causing myopia, right? It's causing myopia, and then when we're overstimulate, you brought it up earlier, right? Angiogenesis. When the retina actually works off a Warburg metabolism, right? And so that's why it's not just cancer that it has a Warburg metabolism. That is how it is. And so when you are stimulating vasodilation and angiogenesis, you cause the pressure in the eye, which is macular degeneration. And I personally know people that are curing macular degeneration with red light.
Red light. Okay. My mother has
Infrared.
macular degeneration, but we hadn't thought about doing that differently for her.
It's all the blue light. Like the blue light is technically or straight up, without a doubt, killing us.
Right. But back in the
So
'80s, though, that black and white Macintosh was black and white. Though. I don't call that blue light. But either way, the radiation period itself. Now we have screens that have the radiation protectors, less, I guess, induction of that blue light. But you're right. The more you keep on staying in that, it's going to impact not even just your consciousness, but your mood. There's studies
absolutely.
about pregnant people and blue light, how it has impact on their mood. So yes, the children and the kids today coming through and dealing with technology and on the cell phones all the time, it's negative impact all the way around.
It's the number one reason that I homeschool is the light environment. There's other reasons, don't get me wrong, but that's the number one.
And I don't turn my lights on in my office. I have fluorescent lights that they have. I kind of keep those off as much as I can. Fluorescent light is also not good for you.
So get your phone and do slow mode and just start filming different lights, right? And then when you play it back, it's got flicker. So it's sitting there blinking, and our brains can detect it, but we can't visually detect it until we play it back and you slow it down. That is another big problem for Tom Seeger is another good friend of mine. He has Maraska Ford, so like the cold plunge, and then he's got he's at Arizona State, but also did My Green Light, and it was a green light for migraines. But what I keep telling him, I was like, Tom, it's the lights that are causing migraines. That most of them, not 100%, but most of them, and it's this flicker of the light. So anybody can do this. Slow mo on, start just filming different lights around your house. That flicker is causing us to have migraines. The lack of UV and infrared play into that. The full spectrum, right? When you look at a rainbow, you have all the colors. We don't have that when we have fluorescents and LEDs.
Goodness, and they're everywhere. The
Everywhere.
fluorescents are in offices, buildings, and
And think about it at night, right? Like when it's supposed to be dark, we're so disconnected from the natural cycles of the earth.
Yeah. Yeah, and we as humans throw ourselves out of whack by not doing what we're supposed to do. Sun go down, you're supposed to go down, but we stay up. So that impacts how these hormones are supposed to be circadian rhythms supposed to be modulating ourselves, and we throw that all out of whack by not sleeping properly. I'm guilty of that because hey, I get a lot of work done at nighttime, but
I bet.
throwing your body out of whack.
Well, and you being a POMC expert understand CLIP, right? And CLIP is actually stimulated by blue light. Blue
Mm-hmm.
light, right? So this is where we're seeing this epidemic of diabetes, right? And so infrared can reduce solely, completely independent of eating, reduce blood sugar. Blue light can raise it again, independent. So if light has that big of an impact,
Yes.
depending on what we're in,
Mm-hmm.
what are we
And
doing?
that's right. And that's so interesting. So you say palm seed, for the audience that doesn't know, is pro-opium melanocortin. It's a large protein molecule. If you cleave it, ACTH, MSH, guess what? Those also affect individually the diet. So when you say
Yep, society.
diabetes and light, guess what? All those particular cleaved molecules from that one large molecule, well, peptide, well, not peptides, protein molecule, those individual peptides have powerful effects by themselves. And beyond mood, we're talking about appetite, suppressants or enhancers.
Yes.
People don't think about, wow, how one hormone like MSH is a melanocyte stimulating hormone can stimulate the cells to make the melanin. But guess what? It's also anti-pyretic. What does that mean? It reduces fever. So you have your own natural fever reducing molecule that also what impacts your skin. So they do multiple things. And if you're saying light, the certain kinds of lights we have, I don't know. Do you have a one of those circular lights for the your podcasting?
Yeah. No. I
You
got
don't
the
use
reptile
those.
lights.
So is the circular one problematic?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
And the
I mean,
reptile
that's
lights
why.
aren't perfect, right? Like that they still have a downside, but it's so much better than an LED or a fluorescent.
Yeah. Personally, I have taped my lectures for my students to have so they can use it for their studying later on, because the Zoom and what the kids went through during that phase, during that COVID crisis, it destroyed people's consciousness. The
It did.
Zoom, this is energy being
Yes.
constantly generated, and then you got the lights around. It's draining. It's like a vampire, electronic vampire. So we need to reduce our contact with this as much as possible, and then just go back to the basic breathing. We don't do that anymore.
100%. I think that the optometrists and dermatologists liked what happened after COVID because I bet their businesses exploded. And so that's another frustrating thing. One more thing I want to end on, because this is something that I see a lot, is that UVA light focally on the skin converts nitrates into nitric oxide. It's not something that very many people ever even talk about. This is a vasodilator, right? Lowers blood pressure. This is something that we don't need an ACE2 inhibitor. Like, we don't need lisinopril. We need to be in the sun, and it has to be exposed. One key on that is that UV is blocked by clothing. So we need more sun on more skin, and the heliotherapy is really the answer.
Right. Do you make beets? Do you grow beets? Do you like beets?
I do. I worry about the beet supplements because depending on genetic predisposition, we can have different forms of nitric oxide that are produced.
Forget the supplements. Make your own beets. That's what I'm saying.
There you go.
That's what I'm saying. If you got your farm, you got that root, you take that out, and actually now go in the kitchen to work it, you get the pigment everywhere. But you think about that nitric oxide also in that beet. You also think about it has an impact on your libido. It can cause erections without having some synthetic products. So I'm saying as a natural element. I'm not saying do the beet powder. I'm saying get your own beets. And if you're down
Yes,
in,
I'm all for that. I'm all for that. There we go. Yeah.
all right,
Nitric oxide is actually what releases stem cell depots. So it's not just the blood, and it's not just red blood cells, right? That's not the stem cells to repair everything. So, like, to truly be regenerated, it requires the sun. That's just like my platform, at least. Like, I just want people in the sun.
pigment
There it
power.
is.
That's what I'm
There
trying
it
to
is.
say. Eat those foods that contain the pigments, get that sun. Guess what? You have a better chance of having a lovely life.
Amen. Dr. Moore, thank you so very much for the time. And seriously, hopefully we can follow up.
Okay, thanks for the invitation, and I appreciate the conversation. And you have a great day.